7 nations. Gone. Not in war, but in contracts, supply chains, and cold-blooded trade deals. While Trump promised to bring jobs home, Germany rewired its factories. Brazil rerouted its beef. South Korea unplugged California and plugged into Ontario. In just 90 days, $42 billion was ripped out of the U.S. economy and handed to Canada. Not one headline warned you. But this isn't the collapse. It's the realignment. And what happens next could leave American industry watching from the sidelines while Ottawa writes the rules. On March 4th, during what should have been a routine WTO hearing, a European delegate whispered to Reuters, "We're not waiting for America to come back. We're planning without them." That whisper became policy. According to Bloomberg, Canada recorded a 14.3% surge in foreign direct investment in the first quarter of 2025, the highest quarterly increase in a decade, driven not by incentives, but by displacement. U.S. trade volatility is now a listed risk in HSBC's country exposure assessments, ranking the U.S. as 31% more unpredictable than its G7 peers. Even J.P. Morgan's 2025 risk outlook noted a collapse of policy predictability under Trump's tariff regime. With $28 billion in European retaliation measures set to activate by July, the silence isn't accidental, it's strategic. This isn't diplomatic frost. It's commercial recalibration, said CSIS fellow Edward Alden. But the real warning didn't come from policy briefings. It came from the shipping manifests of Germany's auto sector. Germany's pivot wasn't loud. It was ledger deep. According to Handelsblatt, within 3 weeks of Trump's 25% auto tariff, German suppliers rerouted $8.6 billion in U.S.-bound components to Ontario. On February 14th, Chancellor Scholz stood beside Trudeau in Newfoundland, overseeing a $10 billion hydrogen trade pact that unlocked tariff-free quotas for German auto parts. GM Canada restarted dormant lines in Oshawa, adding 350 jobs, while GM Michigan announced 1,327 layoffs, confirmed by the Detroit Regional Chamber. Summer GmbH, a key supplier to Ford, halted its U.S. production lane, citing tariff uncertainty as the decisive factor. "We're not punishing the U.S.," said Summer COO Dirk Mertens. "We're protecting continuity." As Detroit idled ERP systems across Bavaria, reprogrammed in real time to shift compliance protocols from U.S. to Canadian standards. Germany didn't abandon its American alliance. It updated it. The only question is what happens when that system becomes permanent. When Trump hit renewable imports with a 30% tariff on March 12th, Denmark's Esbjerg wind terminal went still. According to the Danish Wind Industry Association, over $680 million in U.S. contracts were frozen within a week. But instead of stalling, Denmark went west, further west. On April 1st, it signed a $1.5 billion clean tech trade agreement with Canada. Turbine blades, once scheduled for Texas, now land in Halifax. Solar arrays, meant for Miami, are unpacked in Saskatoon. Vestas reassigned 150 engineers to Halifax and Regina. Nova Scotia's Department of Labor reported a 250-person surge in energy sector hiring tied directly to Danish equipment. Albor's factories adjusted their calibrations to Canadian voltage specs within 6 days, according to Burson. Trump tried to punish China, but he grounded Denmark, quipped Danish MP Morten Østergaard. Yet, as orders piled up in Toronto, it was France that executed the most calculated energy redirection of the year. Quiet, brutal, and fully quantified. Inside South Korea's Incheon logistics hub, hundreds of containers packed with LG Chem batteries stood still. A 20% U.S. tariff on lithium modules effective March 15th had erased California's order book. But Seoul didn't sue. It pivoted. On March 20th, LG Chem and Samsung SDI finalized a $7 billion battery supply agreement with Northvolt Canada, shifting 500,000 EV modules to Windsor, London, and Hamilton. According to Canada's Ministry of Innovation, 700 technicians were hired in the second quarter alone to meet the assembly demand. Meanwhile, in Ulsan, Samsung avoided furloughs on over 3,000 line jobs by rapidly transitioning output specs to meet Trump and Canada's certification. Bloomberg NEF now estimates that Canada will outpace California in installed EV battery capacity by the fourth quarter of 2025, a stat that was inconceivable just 6 months ago. The tariffs turned supply chain allies into code-switching engineers, noted Stanford economist Dr. Alicia Chung. But what happened next in line suggests this wasn't reactive. It was a coordinated reshuffle. at McPhy Energy's hydrogen electrolyzer facility outside Lyon production paused on March 6th after the U.S. canceled $820 million in infrastructure orders, citing Trump's 30% import tariff. Within 28 days, France announced a $1.2 billion green energy alliance with Canada. According to Lucine Nouvelle, 800 million euros worth of electrolyzers are now en route to Quebec, with another 400 million in wind systems bound for Nova Scotia. EDF Renewables confirmed that 250 French engineers have been deployed to Montreal and Toronto to integrate with Canadian grid specialists. At Université de Montréal, 180 local trainees are undergoing fast-track certification in French energy protocols, cutting workforce deployment delays by half. France stopped pleading for exemptions and started exporting capability, said Anna-Eve Delbosque of the OECD. And while the U.S. once led the clean energy transition, it's now facing a bottleneck. Friend-shored, but friendless. But if Paris won't wait, who else is preparing to bypass Washington? When Trump's 30% tariff on iron ore and lithium hit in March, Australia's Pilbara mines were still processing contracts worth over $19, $4 billion annually, most headed for U.S. mills. Within 72 hours, Rio Tinto diverted rail logistics west, not to California, but to British Columbia. According to Bloomberg Mining Index, Canada signed a $3.5 billion mineral corridor agreement with Australia under the Northern Stars Initiative by April 20th. By May, Thunder Bay and Vancouver ports logged a 17.6% rise in bulk ore intake. And Ontario's steel mills, including Algoma and Stelco, boosted furnace capacity by 18%, confirmed by Canada's Ministry of Natural Resources. Meanwhile, U.S. Steel and Cleveland-Cliffs warned of raw input shortages by the third quarter, projecting up to 9.8% cost increases in finished domestic steel. This is not a trade slowdown, it's a logistical reformation, said Citigroup's commodities strategist Tracy Liao. And as lithium carbonate began fueling Canada's battery supply chain, one fact became impossible to ignore. U.S. reshoring didn't repatriate production. It exported demand. The U.S. slapped Mexico with a 35% auto parts tariff in early April, threatening $43 billion in northbound exports. And yeah, that sent shock through Ciudad Juarez, Monterrey, and Baja. But Mexico didn't fold, it forged a new corridor. Within 3 weeks, it formalized the Triple North Corridor, an $8.2 billion integrated parts pipeline with Canada, rerouting wiring harnesses, ECUs, and suspension systems directly into Ontario's manufacturing grid. According to Mexico's Secretaría de Economía, trade volume with Canada jumped 22.4%, month over month, hitting a record $20.3 billion by May. Ontario's factories in Windsor and Brampton added night shifts, absorbing volume once bound for Detroit. We bypassed the blockade without breaking stride, said Jose Zosaya, president of AMEA. Bloomberg now ranks Canada as Mexico's number 2 auto trade partner for the first time since NAFTA's inception. The lesson: Washington isolated its supplier, but Ottawa scaled its value chain. On March 1st, Brazil's Mato Grosso ranchers were blindsided by a 25% tariff on beef soy and ethanol, killing access to a U.S. market worth $12.1 billion annually. According to the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, Apex Brazil. Within 27 days, Brazil signed a $2 billion trade pact with Canada, rerouting agricultural flows to Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, and Saskatchewan. Brazil's Ministry of Agriculture reports that 5,000 farm jobs were preserved and revenue losses were reversed within 6 weeks. Canada's meat processors, like Maple Leaf and Alamo, added 400 new hires, and ethanol facilities in Quebec saw a 32% increase in inbound shipments per StatsCan. The speed of this pivot stunned Washington. They rewrote supply contracts in less time than it takes us to pass a farm bill, admitted U.S. Ag Committee staffer Todd Swanson. While U.S. soy rots in silos due to tariff standoffs, Brazilian cooperatives in Londrina are breaking export records. The question now is who's really feeding the next chapter of North American trade. In 90 days, 7 countries collectively rerouted more than $42 billion in supply chain value away from the United States and into Canada, according to data compiled by the WTO and Bloomberg Economics. Canada's first quarter 2025 FDI spike, up 14.3%, wasn't driven by tax breaks, but by reliability premiums. JP Morgan now classifies the U.S. as the most volatile G7 market for tariff risk exposure, citing White House policy unpredictability as a key deterrent. Meanwhile, Canadian ports reported 11.2% cargo volume growth, and industrial employment rose by 18,400 jobs in just 2 months per Statistics Canada. As CSIS's Edward Alden put it, Washington didn't just push partners away, it incentivized them to bet on Ottawa. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce now warns that a prolonged tariff regime could cost America more than 138,000 export jobs by the first quarter of 2026. While Trump promised to repatriate production, he inadvertently triggered a trade realignment where Canada became the new logistical anchor. And trust that's the one resource America can't tariff its way back into. But if you think the trade war ends at Canada's border, well, think again. The collapse of U.S. trade leadership isn't isolated, it's accelerating. Countries like Indonesia, Chile, and Spain are already in talks with Ottawa to deepen bilateral logistics. According to the Wall Street Journal, 8 more nations are exploring post-U.S. supply chain hubs, and Canada is quietly positioned at the center. What happens when the next White House policy freezes even more trade lanes, or when U.S. allies stop asking for exemptions and start building around Washington entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which country do you think will ditch the U.S. next? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.